Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, March 20th. Derek VanRiper, Sarris, Trevor May, all here with you. On this episode, we're going to talk about pitching archetypes, the patron saints in each organization. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Can it lead organizations astray, or is it a blueprint to success? We'll dig into that. We're going to grade bullpens, try to rank top 10s, much like we did with the rotations last week. So we got that coming up here as well. Show announcement, of course, 2 live episodes going down 1 week from today is the first one, March 27th and March 28th, 4:30 start times at Bear Bottle Brewing Company, the Bernal Heights location in San Francisco. Get some Kayakers Cove, the beer that Eno helped brew. Come ask questions, come hang out with us, watch the opening day games, watch some NCAA tournament games. We'll have a great time together. Really looking forward to those live shows. Can't believe it's only a week away. Where did March go? Just evaporated.
It's crazy.
Happens every year.
Crazy. I'm excited. I'm excited to be there. I get to be there this year, so it's gonna be awesome. Gonna take the longest hiatus I've had from my son since he's been born. 38 hours or something.
And yeah, it's the first trip is always kind of interesting when you become a parent. Like I remember doing that this time last year. Same thing. I was like, oh man, it's weird being away from the little guy just because he's there all the time.
I remember the mother-in-law was taking care of our first, and we in that first 2 weeks where you're like, you don't even know what time it is. Like you're just sleeping in 2-hour increments, and it's just it's like some weird zone. We went to Safeway.
That was your first little excursion. You just went to Safeway.
She was just leaving the house without the child. We're just like, wow, the lights were so bright, and we're people were dressed appropriately. We were just
sweatpants,
full,
unshowered. And that was in the pre-COVID era, right? I feel like the societal baseline for what people wear to the grocery store has dipped in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So you see people like this all the time now, but you got to go back 12 years and think, oh, that was different back then.
Yeah. We felt pretty slovenly. We're just amazed by people walking around and doing things.
People continue to function. It is truly amazing. Some news and notes as we get started. To follow up, in the time between our recording and publishing yesterday, the Department of Defense restored Jackie Robinson's page. So that happened sort of as we expected because backlash was there as anticipated. The story that Craig Calcaterra is tracking now is one we also mentioned yesterday. Major League Baseball scrubbing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives from various web pages. It's been about 24 hours. They still have not responded to Craig's request for a comment. So I'm not going to wait for that response. I just don't think it's ever going to happen. I think the action sort of speaks very loudly as far as what MLB actually cares about. So, judge for yourself, I guess, in that case. But yeah, the DoD did restore the Jackie Robinson page that we were talking about yesterday. As far as other news goes, a relatively quiet news day on the spring front. I didn't see any new updates as far as torn UCLs or labrums or anything like that, which, from a typical baseball news day would be a success. But were there any other stories that caught your guys' eye? I think there was one you were telling us about before the show on the analytics side that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's an outfit called Zealous Analytics that was started by Doug Fearing. He was the R&D head for the Dodgers, and he created basically a third-party R&D department where they create models and analytics for teams. They had a rule that, that sounds problematic already. You're like, okay, so they're going to do your analytics, but they live somewhere else and they could do it for some other team. So they had this rule where if you got their best analytics, if you paid for their top end structure, their top end tier, the Titan, if you paid for the Titan, which was $600,000 a year, then you other teams in your division couldn't pay for it, couldn't get it. So only one team per division. So they had 6 clients basically that were at the top level, and the Phillies were one of them. Now the Phillies used to be run by an individual that left to go work for Zealous, and then Zealous started taking employees away from Phillies R&D. So the Phillies in particular were like, okay, but we're still a Titan customer. We still like this. And if you want to know why, this is covered by Matt Gelb's story, but a couple of teams have told me, like in particular, like, oh, well, we needed to jumpstart our R&D department, so we really needed some help, like immediately, quickly, and so Zealous was really important for us. And then other teams are like, well, we want something to benchmark against. We want to like use our analytics and like benchmark it against theirs and make sure that ours are better than theirs. So that was worth $600,000 to us. And so I would actually guess the Phillies are kind of in that department because they have a pretty robust R&D department and they've been doing pretty good analytics. So, any case, Teamworks. Teamworks is a company that I don't know. How did you describe them as like? What did you say they were?
Like WhatsApp kind of. It was a communication and communications app for the whole team. Like if the manager needs to throw out like bus times or and then you could also get your scouting report for the upcoming series there or any video. They started rolling out those things. So they tried to be like a baseball Slack or one of those just like Slack. Organize all your stuff in team communication that was easy to move people in and out as they like got sent down or went to another team or whatever.
And because Teamworks isn't analytics, they are allowed to talk to every team because it's just like a process thing. It's like a Slack, Slack's not like, sharing your secrets with other companies. It's just sort of offering a platform with it to discuss with each other. And that kind of communication is pretty important. I mean, it's, you want everybody on the same page. You want all your documents in the same place. If I was running a team, I'd probably try to develop my own Teamworks, but I could see how that would cut a lot of corners and help me. And so anyway, Teamworks bought Zealous, and Zealous was like, okay, so now we're open for business for everybody. We got an analytics plus, communication software platform. It's all there. Everything is in one place, and we are now non-exclusive. And they went back to all their clients, and they went back to the Phillies, and they said, we'd like to renegotiate a smaller number for non-exclusivity. And the Phillies exercised their option in their contract for an exclusive 2025 season, and then sued Zealous Analytics for sharing competitive advantage secrets with other teams. So I think that's pretty interesting. I think, if I was a team, I would want to just do this on my own, but it can be expensive. I mean, you're talking about, $100,000+ per analytics person if they're good, and then like your head is going to be getting more than that, and you need to spend on the data and the tech and everything. So I think a good analytics department could cost more than $1 million. And front offices aren't. Front offices are expensive, actually, because you have I don't know how many coaches. I mean, you have coaches upon coaches in the minor leagues. You have all of the player development staff. You have all the front offices have gotten big over the last few years. So I could see how just paying Zealous $600,000 to just sort of figure that out, as opposed to building a new one out for $1.5 million or something, might be the right choice for some teams. But it also is like, well, then everybody knows my secrets. I mean, then I'm just sharing. I have the same stuff model as those guys over there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think I'd be like, we need to build this out ourselves. We need to find an advantage, and that advantage can be in communication software, which I would build myself. It can be in all these things like Ivy, like the Cubs have Ivy. That's a communications plus analytics platform. Mm-hmm. And the best teams have their own, and they have a nickname for it. My nickname when I talk to people about it is Brain, because I'm not a team, but that's the brain. And if I was running a team, I would have a good brain. I would spend a lot of time thinking about the brain.
I actually have a lot of kind of experience with asking about how these things are built. Like the interesting one was like the A's is called Oasis, and they built it in house. And it was just analytics mostly, and they use like WhatsApp or something because there were so many international players. And that WhatsApp actually has a lot of things. Like if it's just communications you're trying to do, or like send a document once in a while, in a text message format, it does work pretty well. Or like you could use Discord, or you could use Slack. Like there's a bunch of different ways you could just tailor it to be the way you need it to be. Basic stuff. But if you want like, embedded video players that play really high quality video, if you want to go grab you want to get all your video off, people are scrubbing like Savant because that's available to everybody, and that's part of why it exists that way. You can get a lot of the video there if you need it. And the biggest problem is, the hardest part is not necessarily getting people, the personnel, getting enough people. It's getting the people who are talented enough to build like a communications platform. It's not just like straightforward. It's like, it's a skill.
You're also paying less than, other industries probably.
Yeah.
Baseball.
Yeah. So like, so if you can do it in-house, teams would love to do it in-house. It sounds like the Phillies were more like we're going to pay for this so that no one else in their division can pay for it. And almost as if they were withholding it. And now that's gone away, and they're mad. Now someone else is going to get, and even if they were benchmarking and doing it all in-house.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a third reason to do it, is to remove the competitive advantage from, like, say, we don't want the Marlins to like.
That's probably what pissed them off the most.
Jump ahead, yeah.
Because now they're just undoing that, so the money spent before doesn't matter anymore, like at all.
Right.
So that could be really frustrating. And I think it feels like that's because they do, like you mentioned, they do have a big, robust analytics department. They got a lot of people working in that thing. Yeah. Like they do a lot of their own in-house stuff. And so that seems like maybe it was the straw that broke the camel's back, or the cherry on top of the sundae, whatever you want to call it. The main detail that got there, our competitive advantage just went away, and we were paying for that advantage, and we want our money back if that's the way.
That's what we thought it was worth.
That's why we did it.
You also mentioned in that a pretty interesting thing about international players, because in my vision, the brain has everything. And so everybody just have to have a login, right? And you log into the brain, and you, like in my, like, pie in the sky, you log into the brain. It's almost like just like an email format or something, like where you just come in and it's like, oh, here are your notes for the day. Oh, here's your throwing stuff, and here's this, and here's this. And then, I would love to have, like, you log in and here's your aura stats and your whoop stats, and like how you're doing against our KPIs. Your number one goal right now is bat speed, and here's your rolling bat speed, and like just like we have this at the Athletic, the content management system, and you log into the CMS. It has all your
CMS,
stories, and it has all of the stats, and it has them rolling over time, and they get to decide what I see, which I think is actually kind of okay, because if that's how you're going to judge me, I need to know how you're going to judge me. Show me how you're going to judge me. I will figure it out and get there. But you mentioned international players, and that's a really interesting thing, because Wi-Fi is not something that you can get everywhere in the Dominican. I don't know, I haven't been back to Jamaica in a little bit, but like, I'm in Jamaica, like Wi-Fi, I didn't, that was like the nice hotels had it, And so if you don't have Wi-Fi everywhere, it has to run on cell service. So if you do make the brain the way I'm saying, it has to somehow also be like really light. So like you can still log in on mobile, on cell phone service, and like still get what you need. And the video that you're talking about is one of the sticking points too. Is because how am I going to get you video showing you a drill that I want you to do in the DR? WhatsApp is like pretty good at that. But like, am I going to create the new WhatsApp that's like part of my brain, that I can just send you?
Or you can just use WhatsApp, right?
Yeah, I could just use WhatsApp. Yeah.
So it's all about like linking and APIs. I've done a lot of experiments with this stuff. So funny you mentioned the Whoop stats. We discussed this because I was tracking everything I did in 2023. That was literally the reason I did that. I wanted to see if you could get a dashboard, build it your own dashboard where a bunch of stuff pops up, because it's been built in the same way. And there was a time I was working with a graduate student at Harvard who was interested in this type of thing, and he was trying to build it. Now I retired, and then I got kind of separated and started working on the media stuff, and we both kind of had to put it aside. But I think long term, because there's lots of places that are doing, like Drivelines try to do something a little bit around that.
They bought Modus. They bought the sleeve.
Yeah. So they added Modus to their Pulse, and they added that to their like dashboard. To their like dashboard and their little which I used it Not a huge fan of the dashboard.
Okay.
It was a little bit confused, but again, I actually had a conversation with the rep that got me logged in. He's like, "Yeah, we're still looking for a UI UX person to like, because it's just a really hard thing to do to really over.
It's super important because I need like this as an athlete, like you have so many voices in your head. I need to get you like the most simplest version of this. Like I need you to log in and be like, oh, I have 2 goals as a player. Here they are at the top of my page. Oh,
most guys aren't thinking deeper than that either. They just want you to give them their 3 bullet points.
Yeah.
And so if you can do that,
mine would be like
most guys are that way.
Sleep well, bat speed.
I like the goals thing and working towards it, where like you can get your data from in-game data. You can get it from your ball flight stuff in the cage and the
in training environments. So that has to all go in. Like I would just be like, the brain would be pulling data from everywhere, and then we'd have to have UI people to simplify it so that you'd see it, and then we'd have to have tech people that make it easy to access for sell. I mean, this is what everyone's building towards, and this is really, really important to player development. And the best teams are good at this, but like, are they perfect at it? I don't know, and it's really hard to do.
Do you guys think that we're at the point now where it's the way the information is presented and studied and basically interpreted that matters much more than the data itself? The edge is in how you use it and how you convey it to people rather than the actual data you collect itself, where like that frontier has been leveled to the point where anyone in the league, any team in the league can get as much information as they'd ever actually need. So now it comes down to integration like this.
I would agree with that. That sounds the reason I think that's true is because of how quickly like the league is picking up on things. And so it's okay if it's not as big of a deal if you're not first to the thing. For example, pitch design is a great example, because now there's like amateur businesses or just amateur people finding this stuff, and people are like seeing a TikTok about it and like, oh, I can design this pitch. They can get it that way. It's not so proprietary. Everyone's trying to get their own foot in the door.
Is
so the information's freely flowing a little bit, to the point where if you're quick, you can put it into play quickly. So I think that it's about, okay, I understand this. I am a coach or a development person or an analytics person or a front office person. I see value here. Maybe we could deploy. How do we then deploy this? How quickly does it go from me noticing it to someone or to players on my team putting it into action on the field? That speed is now I think the skill that is separating teams from each other. People are getting understanding quickly. It's just how you use that. How quickly do you act on the compass post pointing somewhere? And like I think the epiphanies we're having technologically about how baseball works are just getting fewer and far. The big ones, right? Oh my God, seam shift awake. Those things are not going to be every 2 months like they've been. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where we know how the game's played for the most part, and then it's just about adjusting to what the other side is doing again with that information and who's doing it better, which is exciting. I think that levels the playing field a little bit more. I think we actually the parity in our league has benefited from that idea a lot.
There's a lot of stuff in there that I think will be relevant to our next topic, but I did want to mention, I wrote a piece called "Is Data Dead?" and it was about this. It's about like how teams are leaning into things like empathy and soft skills in communication abilities and stuff like that in there. I think it was Pat Murphy, like a lot of our stuff from the winter meetings. Mm-hmm. So it's Pat Murphy talking about being humble, that these soft skills are becoming more important as, the data stream is homogenizing. And part of what I was talking about in that story was Zealous, because there are more and more teams getting hooking up to the same data. And like StatCast, that's like StatCast has 30 clients, among 30 teams. So, to some extent, data is homogenizing. But when I was at the analytics conference this past weekend, someone actually quoted my story and then was like, "He's wrong." And he's like, "And here's why." And he did a whole thing about neural waves, and it was an interesting presentation. I wish I had the name in front of me. I'll share it in the Discord, but it was an interesting presentation about if you look at the neural waves of a baseball player, you can look at the neural waves of a pro player and look at the neural waves of a college player, look at the neural waves of a men's league player, and look at the neural waves of a non-player. And you can actually sort of pick out who's the pro, who's the amateur, and who's the guy who doesn't play at all. And he thought that this, and that's pretty interesting because that means that there's something neurologically going on. I think that it makes sense. We've talked about chunking and how players create little sort of packages of movements that they can access, and as they become a pro player, they don't have to think as hard about every little part of the process anymore because they're like, I've been doing this. I just access the load, access the like your brain is just thinking and accessing these packages and chunking in ways. So that I think you might be able to see that neurologically, but actually being able to measure it means that maybe you could train it in a certain way. Maybe you could look for it, scout for it. The problem with data streams like this, and I mentioned like the Oura and the Whoop, like I find those really fascinating, really important, really interesting because they're biometrics. They're not biomechanicals, things that are from the outside. These are biometrics that are inside. They're super problematic. It's super problematic because the MLBPA is going to say no, and for good reason. I remember this basketball player that was supposed to go in the first round, and they did a heart test, and they said, you have a heart condition. You might die on the court. You're not allowed to play in the NBA. And I was just like, wow, like that's crazy. Like, like that's, didn't even give them the decision to be like, no, I'm a risk it or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they're just, nope, you can't play. And I think that players would be like, oh, you want my neurological data so that you can decide that maybe you could bring it up in arbitration, be like, well, his neurological data says he's not
that's
really
the big
good.
One, yeah.
Yeah. Or trade me away because, or decide not to favor me. I mean, in player developments, there's the favorites, there's the guys, the big guys, and then the guys who get less attention. And you know what I mean? The guys who are at the top of the lineup in AAA and the guys who are, you know what I mean? Like, so there's all these sort of decisions that a player could feel like could be made, and the Oura stuff is like, I would love to just give players Ouras so they could start to see this stuff and make their own decisions and start to see it. Because one thing we've talked about is like if you look at an Oura, you know that your sleep efficacy after even one beer, goes down the tubes and your heart rate is up while you're sleeping. Like if players could see that, they might start making better decisions for baseball at least, and you could do that without us. But from the team perspective, there's still going to be the player being like, I don't want you to have that data. I don't want you to know about my brain. I don't want you to know about how many beers I had last night. That's me. So there's definitely, those are some possible data streams, and they're really interesting to me, but they require a level of trust between the organization and the player that I don't think exists right now.
That's if the organization is the one providing it. But what if there's a third party that doesn't need the organization? I know that the Reds and Cal Bodie was a guy who pushed for this. Was a lot of in the minor leagues, a lot of them wore Auras. When Joe Boyle came over, he's like, I have an Aura ring, and we went over some of his data because I was doing all my data collection, and he was fascinated by it. And then like a weekend, he's like, yeah, they took the Aura back. Now I don't get a. Or they didn't, or they like I don't have an account anymore because of course there's a subscription to see the thing. I don't have an account anymore, but I have the ring. I was like, okay, well, that sucks. And so they were doing that, but like I know the PA for definitely wasn't like pumped about it because it's just making their job harder. Now they need to argue things that they don't know, like they don't know how they're using it. It's an uncharted territory, and that makes sense. That makes sense. That's exactly how they should. They should be hesitant on your behalf. Team, I'd be like, stuff.
Put stuff in the CBA says you can't use an arbitration. I don't want to use an arbitration. I just want to know this. I want to have this data. Yeah. I want to be able to act on it.
It's simple. It comes down to, unfortunately, they don't trust each other at all. For also good reason, in my opinion, because there's not been a lot of good faith in the last 10 years. So it's just that's what it comes down to. But I think long term stuff like that, having biometrics on yourself, is extremely valuable in a vacuum for just the guy, especially if they take an interest in using it. And I am totally not biased because that's exactly what I did.
I think the really important part of that, though, to keep them from just being expensive toys, you need people who can help you interpret the information. That's
where the team could come in. I like
there's just a learning curve there.
Like creating. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to say. And that's like I think you need to. That's why I would create a portal that you can log into. I'd give you the aura. I'd create a portal, and if this is possible technologically in a way that makes everyone happy, I'd have a buy-in, like an opt-in. So you can look at this data, and it's just your data, or organized the way we want to organize it.
Yeah.
But it's just yours, and we don't have it unless you click there. And if you click there, it's anonymized so that we don't know it's you, and the data gets uploaded into the brain. I don't know if that works, but that's walking the line. It might work.
I'm thinking of like especially Whoop, because Whoop like gives you a map of your entire 24 hours of what your heart rate was. Like if they had live feeds of everyone's heart rate on the team, they're tracking like in game, like who is feeling what. That
it would have to be anonymized.
Yeah, it's got to be anonymized. That's super fascinating. It'd be super cool to see that, but also I could totally see the bet. Like if anyone with that or especially like people who own the team who are trying to not pay as much, like that could be extremely valuable in that
clutch. They might be able to be like, that guy's not clutch. Look at his heart rate.
Exactly. Oh, he's at 195. I'm worried about him having a heart attack, not getting the job done here.
Feeling like there's actually a lot of hidden downside here. Also want some quiet hours and privacy hours on these. I don't want to know your heart rates when you're away doing whatever it is you're doing when you're away. It's none of my business. There's a lot of slippery slopes, I think, with this. You hinted this earlier. There's kind of a connection here. I think this happens in all facets of life. If an organization or a person has success, they try to replicate it to the best of their ability. And it got us wondering when we were planning for the show yesterday, if organizations largely have these archetypes, these patron saints, these players that they kind of say, all right, we had Corey Kluber. Let's make more Corey Klubers. And that's just how you sort of define your general approach to pitching as an organization, right? So do we think this largely exists? Is this something that's 30 out of 30 teams actually have some sort of roadmap for a specific type of pitcher they're trying to develop? Or do we think it's something that is kind of loosely structured by some teams? They find something like the Yankees with the right-on-right changeups, and they just seek that out until perhaps the competitive advantage of doing that starts to go away.
Yeah, I think that's the difficult part is the timing, because we're, like Trevor said earlier, things move so fast right now that, what worked last 5 years ago may not be relevant anymore. And I think most teams know that. But at the same time, I think there's a real residual there. Once you have success in a certain way, it really affects the entire organization. And I think the one way I see it is like I'm in the cereal aisle, and it's like, there's only like 5 or 6 cereals that my kids want, but now all of them have done all of the different things that they could do. They've gotten mini, or they've added chocolate inside. I mean, it's all the same shapes, but they've tried to add this taste from other things. So everything has a strawberry version. Everything has it's like, but it's like still Cheerios, but like there's ones with little chocolate inside.
It's the Coke freestyle concept just applied to cereal. And you're not walking up to the machine pushing the buttons. They're deciding at the cereal factory what you're going to get. But yeah, or they spin a wheel and it's like, okay, shape, spin a flavor. Okay,
yeah,
color
exactly,
in that. Okay, now we have blue raspberry mini Cheerios. That's what we have now.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do think the revelation for me has been Kluber to Bybee Kluber to Bieber to Bybee. I think is a tree. This is a thing that worked. A guy that didn't have the greatest fastball but had great command and a great breaking ball. Oh, okay. Let's draft this kid out of UC Santa Barbara that has, doesn't have the greatest fastball velocity, but has a great breaking ball. Bybee wasn't drafted in the 2020 draft and went to work on some weighted balls during the COVID year and stuff, and came back with more velo, and they were like, oh, this is Bieber 2.0, so it's like they seem to have followed that to a certain extent. The revelation for me was the Osvaldo Bido is like a sleeper for me. We talked about it yesterday. I have like every team has Osvaldo Bido on it this year. And I was very happy to find out yesterday that he did make the opening day rotation. There was Mitch Spence is another guy that I think is going to be good, but like, I guess I don't know what they're doing with him. He's not in the first five. So I don't know. I think they're making a mistake there, but in any case, Bido and Luis L. Ortiz have very similar profiles. They both have a fastball, a four-seam fastball, a sinker, a cutter, and a slider. And that's, I think, like I was trying to figure out who else has this, and I was looking around. It's a bit of a rare thing to have. Like you don't have a curveball, you don't have a changeup. It's like 3 fastballs and a slider. Like I would challenge people on the Discord, please, who did I miss that's like this? Who could be the patron saint of 3 fastballs and a slider?
Lance Lynn.
I guess there's, Lance I
Lynn.
just thought of it. I was just thinking Lance Lynn. The other one is Mitch Keller. And the reason I thought that Mitch Keller mattered is because Mitch Keller, Osvaldo Bido, and Luis L. Ortiz were all developed by the Pirates. And I can't reach back to the Corey Kluber. I don't know who the original person is for this. But I also noticed that the Pirates are among the league leaders in sinkers at certain times. And like, you know, they're just off this list. This is done by sinkers. But when I see the Brewers on here with a lot of cutters and a really balanced mix, I think of both Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burns as guys that have had a lot of success with the cutter and weird four-seam sinker types. So I feel like there might be a patron saint there in Corbin Burns for the Brewers, and Mitch Keller for the Pirates, and Corey Kluber for the Guardians. But I know there's got to be more out there. Well,
That's
I
a
did
lot.
want to throw. I wanted to throw to you, Trevor, the idea of like, you know, once that someone's had success in the organization, you had this good story about, you know, once a player's like a lot of times grips. Like once a player was like a grip was given to you when you were coming up in the Twins.
Big Irv, right?
Yeah, Irvin Santana is how I learned my slider as it was towards the end of my career, away from my curveball. So I just got rid of a slider grip because I wanted something between them, bigger, and I just tried. And we were in like a testing phase. I was just trying some stuff and catch and me and Josh Kalk were developing more of a rapport. So I was like, "Hey man, what do you think of this?" And I remember that one being, he's like, "That one, that one." That's the one. He goes, "You throw that now." He actually is like, "Yeah, you throw that now." And Jeremy Hefner was in the analytics department there, kind of as the liaison to the pitcher. He's like, he goes, "That's pretty clear." I'm like, "Yep, that's pretty clear. We're going to do that." So, and it was just me messing around with Irv's grip, and he showed it to me. But I think that's the old school version of this is everyone asking each other for their grips. Like, how do you throw that? How does it come off your fingers? I remember Adam Ottavino talks about, you know, when he was in the All-Star game with Colorado, and everyone's like, "Dude, how do you throw that slider?" Everyone asked him. Everyone wanted to know.
That might be one of the
sweeper.
most original sweepers. Yeah,
and he was doing it it's hilarious that he was doing it in Colorado, which is funny, but it actually didn't move near as much. And then as soon as he went to the Yankees, it was crazy. So it starts with everyone like, "Hey, what is this guy who's done it before and has success? What's his thing? And can I do the thing?" Now we have so much information on why things happen. So I think that's the difference now. Everyone thinks about it this way. This is a very like traditional baseball way to think of development. But the best teams are the ones, and the Guardians are a great example, who go and see a guy like Kluber and know why he's so good at those things. Not just that he can do them, but why he's good at doing them, and looks for those indicators in the guys. Like that might be said they might be able to do what Kluber does, but if they don't, we are still confident in our ability to then find what their thing is. There's like a plan B. We can fall back on these other good things they do. And it just so happens that they're right, especially with Bieber. And then kind of an offshoot of that was like Bauer and then Clevenger, right? Clevenger kind of just came and just did everything that Bauer did. And it just worked. Like he just picked it up because they were similar. I think they had a lot of markers that were similar. And then they were both good together at the same time. Another team I think that does it well that we haven't mentioned is like the Astros. because if you think about it this way, they had Justin Verlander and they had Garrett Cole, and they're like, throw fastballs up, go to hard slider, let's
and those guys probably
but then they have
baseball together. Yeah, and then
they
totally
have
different.
these guys, but if you notice, not everyone. Then they had Framber, and they're like, oh, just throw sinkers and curveballs. He's completely different than them. But they were like, we're not going to force this. We understand why they're good, but we also understand why you're good. And though it might be unorthodox, we're getting results, and so now we have two different archetypes. Are you a Framber? Are you this guy? And then then Hunter Brown. That's like, you're trying to do the Verlander thing, but you're not quite the same. Maybe a sinker is the thing, and then they added that. Like, oh, no, we found something else.
That did take a little bit longer,
It did, but again, that was a small, because he is he's like 92% match with those.
He really looks like Verlander.
He really does. He even does the pause when he steps back. He even does mechanically, which you can tell the ball moves out of his hand a little bit. His arm slot's a little bit lower. He's not as tall of a guy. Like, all of these things are different, and so he needed to make a slight adjustment. Those things take longer, but they got there. And so the Astros are doing a good job with it as well. I would say the Rays do, but usually everyone gets hurt before they can make an adjustment. So that's the issue over there.
A couple of jump offs there. One is like the downfalls of this approach of like, if you are too focused on what has worked before, how do you deal with someone who's new? I think of Tobias Myers going to Cleveland and telling us that, in Cleveland, they really wanted him to place the ball, whereas in Tampa and Milwaukee, they just wanted him to grip it and rip it to one target. And you also think about Cleveland trying to teach a breaking ball to a guy who can't really spin it. Tobias said, I'm not really good at spinning it. I'm a pronator. I'm a changeup four-seam fastball guy. And so I wonder, like, what will Joey Cantillo's outcome be like? Will he be more will he end up being like a reliever? Isn't Morgan the guy with the crazy changeup with the Guardians?
Yeah, Morgan.
Yeah, and maybe they'll just be like, oh, we can't develop. You don't have very good command, and you can't develop a breaking ball for you. We haven't had success like teaching guys like you breaking balls. So the guy that you look most like is Eli Morgan. So maybe you're just going to be Eli Morgan out of the pen for us. For the Rays, it's possible that Painter's was saying to some degree it's Chris Archer, because I think he was a power slider guy, and a lot of their guys throw the power slider and then find a second breaking ball off of that, as opposed to Chris Archer was like looking for a changeup in previous places most of the time. But I think the Rays were like, no, just be you, just lean into your best pitches and just be who you are. And there's some similarities there with also simplifying. He might have been the guy before Glasnow where they simplified the targets, because if you look at Archer's
not great command either. Yeah, he was throwing in the box. You're fine.
Yeah, just throw it in the box. So those are the good things. But the bad things are when you lose Tobias Myers to the Brewers because your teaching is too focused on things that worked for Bieber and Kluber and not for Tobias Myers. And there's going to be, maybe the Hunter Brown thing is an example of it taking a little bit longer because he didn't fit, certain archetypes I had before. But I just think, it is really easier. I mean, one of the things you can say is like, well, Ervin Santana has a great slider. So if Ervin Santana is going to show me his grip, I'm going to friggin' listen. I mean, you had the example of everybody trying to learn Mo's cutter, and maybe the only person who pulled it off was Kenley Jansen.
He's closest. We talked about that last year. He is the closest in terms of movement for sure.
But still not really there.
Yeah, but I think it's still a unicorn. Players, and on the player development side, because when we were talking about the player development processes earlier, like on the player development side, this is really important because you have so many players and you want to have individualized plans for each, but it actually works a little bit better if you can kind of put them into buckets to some degree. So that you can be like, oh, we the Yankees, we have 2 or 3 buckets. If you're over the top, we want you to look like Luis Gil, Luis Severino. We want you to be power over the top, power slider. That's what you are, 4-seam slider. That's your deal. If you're, at 30-degree arm angle, then you are Michael King, Clark Schmidt. I've talked about this a lot. I did notice something recently. Hayden Wesneski is neither over the top nor is he. So Michael King, Clark Schmidt, and Will Warren all basically have a 37-degree arm angle. It's really crazy. They're like the same arm angle. So they had a plan for them, and it slightly diverges. Clark Schmidt has a better curveball. King has a better changeup. They're not all the same. But Wesneski is actually 45, 50-ish, and it's not quite past 50. You're kind of over the top. So I wonder if they put him in the wrong bucket.
It's possible. The Tobias Myers thing is a great example. And one little nuance I think people kind of get lost in is you have people developing and talking to these guys, right? So like there's pitching coaches or there's a pitching coordinator or something. Sometimes timing is the issue, right? Where someone else is struggling, which they know is in one of the buckets, and they're spending all their time with them, and then someone else just doesn't get as much attention, like Tobias Myers, and they just like, we can't. We don't have the ability to get this guy to where he is because he doesn't fit in one of our buckets, and there's a lot of work to be put. So he's just going to have to figure it out with somebody else. Yeah. We don't have an easy plan, and we can't come up with one right now. Or someone gets to stay in the big leagues because their team isn't very good, and they get to figure this thing out because there's no other options, as opposed to someone just not getting the shot to make the adjustment, and they have to do it. They end up somewhere else. That happens all the time, and it's just how quickly, like I said, how quickly can you notice the thing and then get it deployed and get that person bought in, so that then now their work is them working on it, and you don't have to focus on them so much. I think that's what people are looking for in their players a lot. Like if they get that idea that I tell you something and we're working on it, I don't have to worry about you after that point. Everyone wants as many of those guys as possible. Yeah, exactly. Just because obviously they're going to take control of their careers, but like you're dealing with 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 21-year-olds, like not everyone's in different places in their life maturity wise, and they don't know what to do. So that happens a ton. That's like I think the biggest thing is just getting lost in the shuffle sometimes when there's something there. And that's why we're seeing teams like the Rays go get a guy who's just been like 6 there and a 6 there in 12 innings and not getting shots. And then suddenly they throw a 1-4, right? Yeah. Like that's the extreme version of that, but that's why they were so good. And that's what teams are doing. But everyone's now getting there to where now guys are getting, a lot of times they know, they're like, I know what would make you better. We just can't get you there yet. We don't have time to get you there because we have to make a roster move, or there's a crunch, or spring training's ending, or you're a Rule 5 guy and we have to send, like there's a lot of that where they just like, I think we could get you there if we had another month, but we don't. We got to send you back. And then they figure it out there and you're like, dang it. Like that's the you heard Mark Elias talk about it a lot. He's just like, I just don't want to lose these guys and then have them become, it's like his biggest nightmare as a GM, which is not good. Actually, it's really hard to get rid of anybody. You kind of turn into a player hoarder at that point, which they kind of have a little bit.
Yeah, that's what they do. But when I look at, if I'm looking at a healthy organization, I look at different ways to produce major leaguers, and I think the Rays are like that because when I look at the Rays, Zach Littell on that roster is like completely different from everybody else, and even Taj Bradley at this point is pretty completely different from the rest of the crew. The rest of the crew is all power, like multiple power sliders. Like we've got 3 or 4 different breaking ball shapes. They're all power. They've been a big on ride in the past. Like who's the sinker baller on the Rays? I don't really. It doesn't come to mind right away. But Littell is like a softer fastball and a lot of splitters and all about command. And they gave him a shot and it really worked out for them. And he doesn't really fit the mold. When I look at the Seattle, what I like is when I talk to them, Logan Gilbert and Bryce Miller feed off each other because they have similar arm slots and they can teach each other grips and they can show each other things that work. And I was talking to Brian Wu and he's like, yeah, I mean, I know those guys geek out all the time and I'm friends with them and we hang out, but like I can't really talk to them about pitching because I'm here and they're there and like we don't speak the same language. So, I go bug Luis Castillo for his changeup
they're
grip
similar. They're more similar. Yeah,
it's like I talked to Castillo about how to keep our fastball separate and and our changeup grips and stuff like that. So there you can have 2 patron saints too.
Well, I think it goes back to having multiple plans. If this doesn't work, then we could try this. And it's saying we have 4 to 5 different templates that we like to work in. If these things aren't working, if you don't fit any of those, then you're going to get traded. You're going to get DFA'd or something's going to happen. But
or you might have to figure it out on your own at the drive line or tread or whatever.
Right. But trying to fit everybody into one mold or even two might not be flexible enough given how different pitchers are across the board right now. And yeah, I keep thinking about the Taj Bradley stuff we've talked about over the past year. Can he find something else that just gets him out of that primary velocity band? Because I think that would unlock everything. And it's like, if we're talking about it, I'm sure the Rays have talked about it and tried it, and there's some reason why it just hasn't quite clicked yet. But he just turned 24 today, so happy birthday, Taj. I'm sure you're listening to the pod on your birthday. But I still have that little glimmer of hope that something will actually click for him.
What if he come up in an organization that had Kevin Gossman, in the major league rotation? Like, I wonder if it would have helped him at all.
Yeah,
these are the kind of conversations that really help people. Bumgarner was like, I remember when CC came to town, Bumgarner wanted to see his cutter grip. Ran across the field to talk to him about cutters. So, these conversations matter, but it is hard to kind of do the mapping. I bet you there's somebody we haven't even thought of that sort of has affected an organization that someone is like sort of shouting about right now into the radio.
Let us know in Discord if you're the one shouting right now. We're happy to hear from you. We're going to go through an exercise similar to what we did last week. We're going to try and grade the top 10 bullpens, and I'll start with an open question because we each went about this in our own ways. How are you grading a bullpen entering this 2025 season? Trevor, what were the criteria that you cared about?
So my 3 categories, which I feel like is a nice number to approach anything like this with, it gives you something. I kind of thought of it as bucketed out the roles that are traditionally in a bullpen, but then thought about like versatility in those roles. So like this is with the assumption that your bullpens, the people who are out there and in it right now, are in it. All right, and adding something or people getting better or whatever is not being factored in. So I have the closer.
Impossible to factor in.
Well, but even like guys coming up, just like who, if it happened right now and this is the list, how could you fill in these 3 categories? And one's closer. So your quality of your closer, if you have one that like Manuel Clase, for example, and vice versa, say he's throwing all the time, your offense scores 2 runs every game, you're up 2-1 all the time, and you need someone else to pitch, even though I'm pretty sure he would just pitch every time because everyone in that bullpen throws 80 times a year. Who else could you throw in that role, and who has experience and who has done the job well? All this stuff's factored in. And then the setup, like what are your options for the 6th, 7th, and 8th to get to you to the closers? And then how can those things move around and still be and still be quality options in the most situations? And then the bridge for me is like, guys, say the starter blows up and you need to cover innings. So you have a long guy or a couple guys who can throw multiple innings. And then some of those guys also have the option to like throw the 1 inning in the 6th if they need to. The Dodgers have been throwing their bullpen together like this a lot as of late. And that in my mind is like one of the best ways to do this. So it's like covering innings, same way the bullpens were, or the starting rotations were, and then getting to the closers, and then how consistently can you say this game is over going into the 9th inning, and just going from there. That's how I did it.
All right, so let's get some results up on the screen. If you're watching us on YouTube, you've got the Dodgers as the best bullpen in the game right now by that criteria. Guardians, Twins, Tigers, and Yankees rounding out your top 5, and then Brewers, Orioles, Royals, Padres, and Braves going 6 through 10. I mean, the Dodgers, it's a function of adding Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates probably to the equation, right? The quality of what they added versus the quality of what was lost, guys like Brazier and Hudson, that's a big swing, right? If the Dodgers were the 5th or 7th or 8th best bullpen, whatever they actually were coming out of last season, that's a pretty big boost. So I imagine that's kind of how they jumped ahead of a historically dominant Guardians pen for you.
Yeah, well, if you think about it this way, in terms of the number of bullpen guys in that bullpen who have like 20-ish saves in the last 162 games, they have 5. So like, I hope that makes it clear. We got Evan Phillips, who has closed a lot of games. Trinan has closed a lot of games. Then they added 2 closers in Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates, you mentioned, who both saved a bunch of games last year. And then you add Michael Kopech, to that mix. And then you have Vesia, who just closed the game in Tokyo, and he's not even in the 5 I just mentioned. And then Anthony Banda threw really, really well. He's going to be throwing. Him and Bruce Agrawal are going to be throwing in the 3rd inning sometimes, in the 8th inning sometimes. The whole bullpen from 1 to 8 can be, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 guys, won't get a save this year, and that is crazy. That's insane. That is depth on top of depth on top of the depth. With and in contrast, the Guardians, they have a bunch of options, but they are much more rigid. I think it's more of the 2015 Royals. The game is where at this point, this is the score. You're going to see these 4 guys, and here they come: Tim Herron, then Smith, and then Hunter Gaddis, and then Manuel Clase. You're going to see them all the time. What concerns me about them and why they're not number 1, because they last year were the best, is just because they all threw 75 plus times, and that's just too many. It's just too many. I hope they protect them a little bit more, or give more guys options, or their starting pitcher goes a little bit deeper. But that's kind of the difference between those two, in my opinion.
Okay. So, use some different methodology, and I was very surprised to see the Giants clock in at number 1 on your list. I'm going to put your full card up because you've got even more criteria you were using. What factored in? How did you come to the conclusion that the Giants are the best bullpen in baseball right now?
I wanted to use Location Plus and Stuff Plus as my basis, but I thought, why not use a more robust way of including Stuff Plus and Location Plus and use the Oopsie ERA and K-BB. And the reason I use both is that K-BB is more predictive for relievers. It's one of the most powerful things, and it doesn't have like a park effect to it. So ERA does have a park effect to it, and I wanted to have one that was not park affected. But the ERA and K-BB I have listed are Oopsie ones. So that's stuff and location based. So that's driven a lot by stuff. When you see something like the Dodgers K-BB being so good, or the Twins K-BB being so good, that's partially because of their Stuff Plus and their Location Plus. The third thing I wanted to put in was the standard deviation of the arm angle, which is from our last conversation about like how to think of a pen as a full pen, and how to look at the diversity of arm angles coming out of the pen. And that actually hurt the Twins quite a bit. I think the Twins would have been number 1, except that they have bottom 5 divergence or variability of arm angle in their pen. They seem to have a type they like in the pen, and they go with that. They don't have any submariners or anything like that. So their arm angle, and this is from the top 6 pitchers, the top 6 relievers. I did for every team, and it's weighted by how many batters they face. So it's not like somebody's dominating these stats. So the Twins I have is very excellent despite that. The reason why the Giants get to the top is probably a little bit of a park effect on the ERA, because their K-BB is not as good as the rest of these, but also just that old idea of the Rays bullpen. I'm probably going to do a bold prediction that the Giants will have the best bullpen in baseball, because I can go take the arm angles from StatCast and overlay them, and you'll see that it's not just Tyler Rogers. They have Ryan Walker, who's halfway. They have Camilo Doval, who's over the top. They have Randy Rodriguez, who people need to know who he is. He is nasty, nasty. So they have a lot of nastiness and funk and different arm angles. I'm fairly comfortable with this. I mean, I understand it's the outlier. You guys don't have the Giants ranked at all, I don't think. And I don't think many people think of the Giants as a top bullpen, but if you think about it in terms of different slots coming after you, different stuff, different, and to DVR's to Trevor's idea about the roles that they have, like I think that the stuff they have to some extent really fits their roles. So like Tyler Rogers has got to be one of the best guys to come on with a guy on base. Mm-hmm. I just feel like you're just gonna get a little squibber, double play, boom, and he's up there with the Orioles, who also factor in highest on my list. They can go to Yenier Cano when they need that kind of arm slot and that kind of stuff. They can go to Felix Bautista to close. They have different arm angles. They have different kind of funk to them too. So I as a full unit, I think that I can stand behind this. I know when you pick it apart, you're like, well, Doval is just like a third tier class A, so why not have the Guardians higher, but Walker is basically Jake Arrieta. Ryan Walker is Jake Arrieta out of the pen, and Doval is actually, I think, closer to class A than people want to admit. And you have people you guys don't even know, Randy Rodriguez, and nobody else has a Tyler Rogers. So that's kind of the reasoning I have. That when I saw this result, I was like, should I put my finger on my model and change it just because this seems weird? And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go with the stats I used and put them in order of the stats I used. And there you are, Giants at the top.
All right. So I had to take a completely different approach from each of you. I looked back at what we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show, shutdowns and meltdowns. So shutdowns are appearances by relievers that increase win probability by a certain threshold. Meltdowns are the opposite, decrease win probability by a certain threshold. And what I wanted to look at was, of all of those appearances, how many more shutdowns did you have than meltdowns? So combine them together, take the number of shutdowns, divide by the total, and you get a percentage, and say, okay, the Guardians.
This is a shutdown percentage.
Like a shutdown percentage of your impactful relief outings. 73.5% for the Guardians, easily the best in the league last year. The Brewers came in at number 2, 72.8%. There was a bit of a cliff before you got to the Rays, the Braves, the Phillies, and Cardinals, all at or above 65%. Bunch of teams near there. So that was like the first thing I looked at, because I'm like, okay, like how impactful are these relievers? And I wanted to put that alongside innings pitched. Some bullpens get more opportunities. You want to make sure the ones that are more heavily used aren't just getting a lot of extra weight from being out there all the time, because there is downside to that. As Trevor mentioned, I think if you have a concern about the Guardians, it's the carryover effect of how heavily they were worked in the regular season, and then of course having the postseason innings on top of that. Do they all have the same stuff? Do they come back this year and pitch exactly as well as they did a year ago? It's kind of like,
I honestly like the top two, but I don't know how deep it goes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think one thing I noticed
more. We've talked about Gaddis and some guys like that before.
Yeah, I mean, I think Clase A and Kate Smith and Gaddis, like, they're really, really good. That's a great A bullpen. I think one thing I noticed about the Guardians, losing Nick Sandlin, he ended up in the Jays bullpen. That's kind of an important shift when you start looking at some of the things that were happening last year. Like that 4th, 5th, 6th reliever, they do matter a lot when you lean as heavily on that group as the Guardians do. So I do think that was one little doubt. Like, okay, like natural regression, like being that good is hard to sustain, plus a little bit of loss that people aren't factoring in because it wasn't their first, second, or third best reliever, but it was someone that was very important overall. So I think you do have to account for that. Eli Morgan's gone. Scott Barlow's gone. They added Sewald. They added Junis. Like, generally, it's the same bullpen in terms of quality and depth. I think you have to maybe give them the benefit of the doubt for now, using a method like this. And the only reason I didn't just keep the Brewers up there at number 2, they lost Devin Williams. And they pitched half of last season without him. But Devin Williams pops in the shutdowns versus meltdowns. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. He's one of the most dominant relievers during his span of time in the big leagues. So you kind of look at his loss as one that will have a significant impact on them, because it's one fewer elite reliever, even though I think part of this exercise is putting guys in the right spot to not have a meltdown, matching up correctly, taking your Jared Koenig or your Brian Hudson and using them in the right spots. I think that's
where
part
I think
of this
the diversity
too.
Of arm angle can come in.
Yeah, and I think that's
there's
a good point.
certain arm angles that fit certain hitters, and you just know it. And the better teams are modeling it. It's like, this guy cannot see side armors. This guy cannot. This guy can actually hit those guys. Hey, I think I can eyeball it. I think eyeballing it, our consensus rank is Dodgers, Guardians, Twins, maybe Yankees.
Yeah, because both of you guys are quite a bit lower on the Braves than I am. So Braves would probably make 6th or 7th on the combined list.
Yeah.
We each have an outlier, which is not a surprise. I had the Rays pretty high up here. And some of that's just organizational trust. They always
Hunter,
do this.
Biggie and Mason Montgomery, like, they've got guys coming, and I didn't even mention the guys that are doing the 8th and 9th probably. Yeah,
so I felt like they definitely belonged in this group, and they did. It just the shutdown to meltdown ratio, like, they did really well in that metric last year, and that was not the typical A-plus Rays bullpen that we're used to either. So I kind of see that as an organization that has an up arrow in this facet too. The Phillies were a tough rank because losing Jeff Hoffman especially is big. Losing Carlos Estevez, even though they had him for part of the season, is also big. I don't think Jordan Romano is Jordan Romano. Yeah, he's not peak Jordan Romano. Yeah. And even still, you lost 2 good relievers. You maybe added 1. Joe Ross is fine, a little more of a glue guy than high leverage guy. So I thought the Phillies were a team that actually lost quite a bit. And then of the teams that were just awful last year by shutdown to meltdown, the Blue Jays, not surprisingly, they were awful by WAR too. I think they had a -2.5 WAR as a group. They added Hoffman, added Yimi Garcia. They got Sandlin. They brought in Richard Lovelady for depth. So that's like a completely different group of guys there. They could go from one of the worst bullpens in the league to at least league average. But if I had to make a bold prediction, I'd say maybe the Blue Jays have a top 10 bullpen this year. I didn't put them in my top 10, but it's a pretty big overhaul and a clear space that needed to be overhauled.
Yeah, they can make a huge adjustment. I real quick comment on the Braves too. I think losing Joe Jimenez hurt them quite a bit.
And Minter, losing Minter in free agency.
Yeah, because those were the 7-8. So now we're like, what? Now we're asking.
And Iglesias is another year older. I mean, he's a veteran guy. He might be able to hold on to it, but guys don't usually hold on to their velocity. Maybe Craig Kimbrell will close games for them. He's back in Atlanta.
But like getting to Iglesias too is like, they're good. Like they do a good job, but like it's not. There's going to be nothing like crazy special and like the stuff and overall just general like the same thing with the Phillies. Like they still have big lefty throws 102 and they have
Alvarado and Kirk
Alvarado.
It's still good.
Yeah.
They good stuff, but it's like Kirkring hasn't really been dominant in the way that he probably should yet, which I think he will eventually, but he hasn't yet. I'm not going to count on it. And then we don't know who's closing the games, so it's like, guys, your closer's gone. Like I can't give you more when we don't know how you're going to end the game. Like that's kind of important.
By projected K-BB, it's Minnesota, Dodgers, Atlanta, Cleveland, Baltimore. So
yeah, I mean, I think Pierce Johnson, Bummer, Neris, they're all solid.
Mets are pretty good too, with Mentor and Diaz.
Diaz is there with the top of the closers. Buto is, I think, not necessarily thought of as a top setup guy, but he's there. I really like Daniel Nunez, so I think that they have something going. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of he's got everything he did looked good. Like he there's not a lot of like it doesn't seem like a flash in the pan. It seems like sustainable stuff, health permitting and him command permitting, obviously. But if he throws the ball where he wants to, he's tough to hit.
They were right on that threshold. Like had a few holdovers that if they lean on those guys more and they take a step forward, you could see them pretty easily make their way into the top 10. Yeah, Reed Garrett popped big time last year.
Yeah.
So tough exercise, but another fun one, and all different ways to go about it. And choose your own adventure, I think, as far as how exactly you want to grade them. But those were the different criteria we tried to use to put those lists together. I was surprised the Cardinals bullpen graded out the way it did last year, because in my mind, they were not a top 6, top 7 sort of bullpen. They were just kind of average, but they actually looked pretty good upon closer looks. And the one that was really bad that I thought was good, and maybe actually is good because of a lot of trades they made last year, were the Royals. The Royals and even the D-backs adding Puck. Those are two that did not grade well as units. It should be better.
27th in K-BB.
Still?
Projected K-BB. Yeah.
Even with all the changes?
Yeah.
That's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
The D-backs jump for you on that at all or no?
K-BB 15th. So right in the middle.
Yeah.
But that's interesting arm angles, and they were in my top 10.
Okay. Well, AJ Puck, I think one of the more underrated relievers in baseball right now.
Justin Martinez.
Yeah, and Martinez is nasty. If that control gets even a little better, too, there's still another gear I think that he can find. Let us know how you feel about our bullpen rankings, among other things, in our Discord. You can join with the link in the show description. Again, be sure to check out those live shows if you're in the area next week, March 27th, March 28th at Bear Bottle at Bernal Heights in San Francisco. You can find Eno on Bluesky, Sarris.bscott@social. Trevor is I am Trevor May.bscott@social. I am DVR.bscott@social. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.